All right, another episode of the Cole Memo. This is going to be a good one. In today's episode, we're going to be discussing.
Illinois, if you're traveling with marijuana in your car, you must keep it in an odor-proof container, but that could change. A bill in the Capitol would eliminate the requirement. It would also ban officers from searching someone's car solely because it smelled like burnt or raw cannabis. Supporters say it clears up confusion from two different rulings the Illinois Supreme Court issued last year, but the Illinois Sheriff's Association is not on board with this bill.
I don't see where there's any confusion. I mean, like I said, the court ruled and indicated that burnt, we can't search based solely on burnt, and raw we can. That's pretty clear to me.
The court ruled in one case that officers do not have probable cause to search a car if they smell burned cannabis. However, they say officers do have probable cause if they smell raw cannabis. The justices left it up to lawmakers to decide.
All right, yeah, this is going to be definitely a fun one because, they gave law enforcement the ability to testify against the bill that we'll be talking about today, Senate Bill 42, and guess who showed up? Me. Definitely a fun one. Phil, how's it going? Welcome to the show.
Going good. How are you?
Pretty good. Honestly, after I went to Springfield and testified, I questioned why the hell I did that. There's something about like getting up from that. We've watched a few hearings where people testify, and it's like you go up to that little table with the microphone, and there's something about when you're done and you turn around and you see all of the law enforcement in uniform staring at you. There's something a little unnerving about that. But
like you're putting a target on your back.
Yeah, definitely showed my face. They heard my name. And, after the fact, we'll talk about this later. I noticed something weird about something that they brought in for show and tell, and somebody like retweeted me and tagged all of the Illinois Police Association. So I'm like, thanks. Yeah, let them know what the platform is. I'm sure we'll get some fans there. Right.
Just stay within your plant count there, Cole.
Yep. Oh yeah. Yeah. Not that it really matters, but the tent is right behind this screen in front of me, and it has been empty for about 6 months. So I need to get back to growing. But yeah, you're right. When I do, I need to probably follow all the rules because I'm sure they're going to be looking to make an example out of somebody. That's my biggest fear. I talk to my mom about it. I'm like, oh man, I went to Springfield and testified against police, and she's like, and I'm just like, I don't know, I just feel nervous about that. And she was like, well, you didn't do anything wrong, did you? And I was like, I mean, no, but I didn't say things they particularly enjoyed either. So
yeah, like you don't have to do something wrong to get harassed by the police.
Right. I mean, you remember I had somebody on the show that just had a channel on YouTube where they watched police footage, and their house, coincidentally, I guess, got raided by police. And you got to wonder if that was retribution or if it was just a coincidence. I don't know. So, but anyways, yeah, it was an interesting experience, and we're going to talk all about it. There's been some reporting on this. We'll watch a few reports, a few short reports to kind of illustrate it. But I will be saying that, or I did want to say that I think some of the things we're going to be sharing today are kind of it's exclusive information. There was one other news outlet in the room. They did a pretty good job of reporting it. We'll watch some of their reporting today. But yeah, a lot of the details that I found notable, I've not seen in the media yet, so I think that today's show is going to be super interesting. So thanks for being willing to join me for this, Phil.
Absolutely.
And I guess just to start, we'll give some background to what we're talking about. On Tuesday, February 19th, an Illinois Senate committee voted 7-3 to advance Senate Bill 42, which would eliminate the requirement that cannabis be transported in vehicles in an odor-proof container. Senate Bill 42 was scheduled for its second reading in the Senate on February 20th, so like 3 days ago, but it remains unclear to me whether the reading actually took place. I've checked the bill status a few times, and I'm not exactly sure if the reading did take place, but if you'll recall, if people don't know, a bill has to be read 3 times before they can pass it on to the House and a similar process would take place where they have to read the bill. It goes through committee, and then if they pass it out of the House, it can go to Governor Pritzker's desk to be signed into law.
But they can always just get around that by doing gut and replace.
That's right. That is absolutely right. Yeah. Yeah.
Which is kind of insane.
Yeah, people should look into that. Gut and replace. It's a really common tactic in Illinois to get around the 3 reading rule. There's a few other tactics, like reading it once at 11 p.m., reading it again the next day at 1 a.m.
Wasn't the CRTA a gut and replace?
I don't know. That's a good question.
I thought it was.
I'll have to look into that. It
Which
sounds familiar, but
just because, like, I just remember it being like no one knew what was in it.
you know what? Yeah, I think that's ringing bells now. Yeah.
Which is insane because they like worked on it for years.
Right. Since I think at least 2017, 2016, you saw the lead sponsors saying they were working on a bill. So, yeah, pretty nuts, pretty nuts. Well, folks, if you're tuning in live right now, you can comment below and we can display your comment and we can interact with you as the show goes on. If you're tuning into this after the fact and you're wondering, how the hell do I catch these shows live? Subscribe to me on YouTube, follow me on social media, and I usually try to give you a bit of a heads up before we go live. So hit that like button, subscribe. It really helps to support the show and it helps other people to see the show. And yeah. So background again, the Illinois Supreme Court recently ruled that police can search based on the smell of raw cannabis. In a separate ruling, they said police can search on, can't search on burnt cannabis. Did I say that right? You can search on raw, you can't search on burnt.
Right.
So,
which is just so stupid.
Yeah, straight up. And to your point, the Illinois Supreme Court even said something to that effect. I'll have to pull it up here in a moment, but just for background, in the ruling, they acknowledged that the legislature was already considering amendments to the vehicle code, and the Supreme Court actually encouraged lawmakers to also amend the CRTA to ensure consistency between the two statutes. The court emphasized that aligning these laws is essential for both cannabis users so they can apply with possession requirements and law enforcement so they can determine whether probable cause they can determine when probable cause exists. So I was going to look up, they made a similar statement to what you just said, Phil. I'm pulling up Capital News, Illinois, sort of in the same spirit of what you just said, where it's like, it's almost like you would think that they would be able to search on the scent of burnt cannabis because that would,
right.
That would suggest consumption, which is actually the verbiage they use. So I'll display it on my screen right now.
It wasn't the like, I can't remember what was the reasoning for not like, for them being like, oh, it's okay. Was it like you could be around someone that was smoking and get in your car? Like there's no like guarantee someone was smoking in the car.
Yes. Yeah, that's what I recall. And then on the flip side, the reason that because some people might say, well, why the hell would they decide to keep raw or unburnt cannabis as a reason for probable cause? And they said, well, the legislature clearly said it must be in an odor-proof container. And we're not here to question, what the legislature said. They said that pretty clearly. So
right, yeah, it's just the stupid CRTA.
Right. Right. So Justice O'Brien, this is the quote I wanted to pull up, basically said what you said. It makes no sense to treat raw cannabis as more probative when the odor of burnt cannabis may suggest recent use, whereas the odor of raw cannabis does not suggest consumption. So, yeah, sounds like the Supreme Court really kind of agrees with where you're coming from on that as well. So, just an interesting state of affairs, to say the least. But like I say, I showed up. It was an interesting process. Before we talk about like what happened in the hearing,
Wait, I just had a stupid thought. And I
Yeah.
know I think I've said something like it before, but it's like, so if you just want to be sure your car isn't searched, just constantly smell like smoked weed.
It would seem that that's the case. It would seem that that's the case. And, law enforcement, we'll get into this later. We're going to play a clip from law enforcement where they say, well, we can tell, and they said this in the courtroom as well, we can tell the difference between raw and burnt cannabis. But in the past, the same exact person has said the opposite. And so, yeah, you would think that you just, mask yourself with the smell of burnt cannabis and you'd be fine, based on these rulings. But yeah, it's unclear to me exactly, how, because it's like, I feel like almost at that point, just to go along with that hypothetical, they would just say it's raw cannabis that they're smelling. Like if they could actually tell the difference, So, yeah. So when the hearing began, and I want to just give a shout out to the community. The chair of the criminal law committee opened by noting the number of witness slips that had been submitted. So for those that are unfamiliar, witness slips allow citizens and representatives of businesses or organizations to express support or opposition to proposed legislation. It's like a rare opportunity for you, the public, to directly participate in the process. You can talk to your lawmakers and put your statements on the record through either written statements or oral testimony. And when the hearing began, I took note that the chair reported that 338 slips were filed in support of the bill, 98 in opposition, most of which were law enforcement, I will say, and 3 with no position. 2 of those I'm quite confident were mistakes. One of them was the ACLU, and they clarified why they filed as no position. We'll talk about that in a little bit. I just want to say, Phil, this is a thought that just came up to me. So I just said, this is an opportunity for citizens and representatives of businesses and organizations to express support or opposition to proposed legislation. Like, isn't it a little weird that, like, law enforcement, they're supposed to, like, just, uphold the laws, protect and serve. Isn't it weird that they're, like, even participating in this process? Like, does that seem weird to you? I just thought of that. It seems weird to me. Like,
yeah, like, I mean, personally, I don't think public employees should even have unions. So, like,
yeah.
I also don't think they should probably be advocating for policies either.
Yeah, that's kind of
not like showing up in uniform and stuff like that. Like, show up as yourself, Yeah,
that's kind of where I'm coming from, where it's like, your job is to uphold the law. Why are you trying to influence the law? Like you're getting paid by our tax dollars. So it's just kind of
and they have like police have interests, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, like the fact that you're gonna, I don't know, it seems a little, like, of course, legislators are gonna listen to you more than they're gonna listen to someone who's not in a uniform.
Right.
Kind of feels like.
Yeah, definitely feels like that, And when you say you're like you're a trained canine expert, which we had one of those, different things like that. People that have been in law enforcement for close to 30 years, like you say, that could carry more weight to a legislator. It didn't the other day, but it definitely could, to your point, like, so anyways, just a.
Well, I mean, that's why the language is there in the first place.
What do you mean?
Wasn't the odor-proof language something that the Illinois State Police wanted?
Yeah, and in fact, we'll cover that in a bit. I wrote a quote down because I was just like, sometimes when people say things, it's like, oh yeah, they said odor-proof container. That was part of the deal. In other words, like, we worked together, and they also said something to this effect. They said law enforcement and the General Assembly worked together to create what they view as the best cannabis law in the state or in the nation. And the odor-proof container was, quote, part of the deal, is what was said.
But also, like, I don't know that I have heard of any other states that have these rules.
Yeah, and Peter Contos.
Like improper transport is not something I ever, like, if I'm in Michigan, I just have weed in a bag in the car. Like I'm not like putting it in the trunk. Like in Illinois, it's like, oh, it's got to be in a locked thing, out of reach of the, you know. I mean, I get their thinking because like there's rules around transporting open alcohol,
Right.
but yeah, it just doesn't like these other states haven't seemed to need to do that.
Right. Right. Yeah.
I mean, at least as
Exactly.
far as I'm aware, like, because when I'm in other states, I just feel like you never hear. You'd think the dispensary would be like, "Oh, you're from out of state. Be sure you don't have this in your like
Right.
close proximity."
Yeah. Yeah. And to your point, it just feels like the odor proof part of it is like, why is it needed when the law also says that the cannabis must be sealed and inaccessible while the vehicle is in movement? Like, why if we can smell it, is that even a thing? As long as it's sealed and inaccessible.
Well, because they want to look around for other stuff.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. So, yeah.
All the fentanyl they get off the road because they can go into any random car and say that they
And
smell weed.
that is literally one of the reasons they gave. Yeah. So, um, yeah. Senator Ventura, who I actually sat next to, invited onto the podcast, and for the first time, like, I thought I was gonna have to like follow up with her assistant or her. They reached out to me the other day and said, "Hey, Senator Ventura told me that you wanted to come on the podcast. Let's figure it out." So we have that to look forward to. She started off the hearing explaining that Senate Bill 42 would make two key changes. It would eliminate the requirement for cannabis to be transported in an odor-proof container, and it would restrict law enforcement from conducting vehicle or personal searches based solely on the smell of cannabis, whether raw or burnt. One thing that was missing from this entire conversation, by the way, and it seems like it's always missing from this conversation, is it's not only that they violate your Fourth Amendment. If they claim they smell cannabis and you have it in the car, that's a Class A misdemeanor that you're going to be charged with, up to a year in prison, or sorry, jail, and you could face up to a year in jail, and you could be charged with additional fines.
Wait, because I know so the law is it has to be sealed, out of reach, and odor proof.
Mm-hmm.
If it's sealed and in your trunk, but they're claiming they smell weed, that's against the.
Yep. If you remember,
just the smell of weed is a crime.
Correct. You remember Jungle K got charged with it,
stupid.
And his container was sealed. He claimed his container wasn't even opened, if you remember.
Well, I do think his though was like in his center console. Like he just threw it in the center console. I mean, it's a closed container, but it was like in his reach.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point.
At least as far as what I remember from that story.
Yeah, no, I think you're correct in your memory. And here's from the Cannabis Regulation Oversight Office's FAQ. They say, while a motor vehicle is in operation, cannabis must be in a sealed, odor-proof, child-resistant container. It is a Class A misdemeanor to transport cannabis in any other type of container.
I mean, I don't even know that a lot of the containers you get from like the dispensary, like what is really child-resistant?
True. I mean, I will say that some of the containers they have are what I would call adult resistant. I can't. I
have
open
had
some of these
definitely
things, So yeah,
I've had like jars of concentrate and stuff where it was like impossible to get the lid off of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you end up having to just destroy the packaging to get in there.
But I feel like some of the jars are like bags I've seen them sell. Like it's just like this is supposed to be child resistant.
That's a good point. Yeah, yeah, like bags you can buy at like a smoke shop. You know what I'm saying? No, I don't have one here, but yeah, exactly. That's a brilliant point. So, anyways, a direct quote that she gave, this was from Capital News, Illinois. She said, quote, "A recent Supreme Court ruling gave a conflicting directive between raw and burnt cannabis, shifting a huge burden to law enforcement to know the difference. This bill aims to clean up that court ruling by directing law enforcement to consider all factors, not just odor, in deciding if the law has been broken." So I like to say this in case people are like thinking that if this passes, you can just like go willy nilly. If they pull you over and you're speeding, they pull you over for speeding and you have a lit joint in your hand, or they can see that there's a bowl that was clearly been smoked or something, like that will be part of the consideration. So there is still a future in which the totality of the circumstances could, as they argued in the Supreme Court, could end up in your vehicle being searched. But I think you made this point when we started, like it's similar to alcohol, like, you know, like they can, you'll see similar things with that to alcohol. So.
Well, I've heard people say like, oh, those improper transport rules, it's just like alcohol, but I don't think it's illegal to smell like alcohol.
Correct.
Like if you take a shot of vodka and then you get in a car, you're gonna, like, your breath might smell like alcohol, but you're gonna be well within the legal limits. And
yeah,
like
also, I just went to a bar the other day to get a cheeseburger.
Wait, because on that same thought, I don't think that when your breath smell, like if you smelled slightly like alcohol, that alone is not going to get you like a roadside test. Like they're taking in the totality. Like, do you seem like you're inebriated?
Right. Yeah. To add to your point, and this is something a lawyer has made, a point that a lawyer has made on the show in the past. And I just saw this happen the other night. I went to a bar. I was just ordering a cheeseburger and fries for pickup. There's a bar down the road. I just wanted a quick meal. And when I got there, one of the bar staff dropped a bottle. It spilled all over their coat.
Mm.
And what's interesting is that the I think it was Evan Bruno in the past had described a similar situation where it's like, you know, you work in a concert venue or something and you're serving beers, like you might get a beer spilled on you or something like that. And just because you smell alcohol, that doesn't, again, like you said, totality of circumstances. So yeah, well, for this next segment that I think is really funny, let's watch this short minute-long news report from WQAD 8.
In Illinois, a bill moving through the state Senate could stop police from searching a vehicle based on the smell of burnt or raw cannabis for people 21 or older. According to Capitol News at Illinois, the bill would get rid of the state law that requires cannabis be transported in a vehicle in an odor-proof container. The Illinois Supreme Court made 2 rulings on this issue last year. The court says the smell of raw cannabis gives law enforcement probable cause for a search, but the smell of burnt cannabis does not. Senator Rachel Ventura says that means police will have to know the difference between the two.
On top of that, the smell of hemp smells the same as raw cannabis. And so they're now asking law enforcement to know the difference between hemp and raw cannabis in order to not violate someone's Fourth Amendment rights.
But law enforcement officials told lawmakers that officers are trained to smell the difference. The bill passed out of committee and now heads to the...
So yeah, we'll
Is that a shot of the weed they brought in?
Yep.
It looks so bad.
Yeah, and so we're gonna wrap back around to that. I'm gonna keep that up because let's just say I noticed some things about this container that you know, I'm not gonna sit here and say that law enforcement wasn't telling the truth, but all details indicate that, well, I'm confused.
Like, what's even happening with that?
With the container?
Why did they feel the need to present that?
We'll get back to that. It's probably the best part. It actually caused me to break decorum at one point, which I'm a little bit embarrassed about. But I think it was appreciated. I talked to some other people in the room and I was like, look, I feel a little bit embarrassed about breaking decorum. And they're like, no, dude, you did it good. Because I had like short lines loaded up. I said what I needed to say, even though I probably shouldn't have said it at that time. And the chair of the Senate Criminal Law Committee asked me not to do that anymore, which, you know, was interesting.
What did you say?
So basically there was let's get back to that. Actually, I want to save that later because that's probably about the best part of this. I'm just trying to build up. So if you recall, ACLU, I said they voted, they filed a witness slip as no position. They explained that they did that because they said they support the bill with the addition of Amendment 1. So Amendment 1 removes language that would require, I can't remember how it was worded in the law, but it basically said, like, you can't search a vehicle on the basis of odor of cannabis if the person's 21 years of age or older. And the ACLU's concern was, okay, they won't pull you over for cannabis odor anymore. They'll pull you over to ID you, and then they'll, get what I'm saying? They don't want to give law enforcement another reason to just, like, pry. You understand?
Oh, they want it to apply to everybody.
Yeah, they want it to apply to everybody.
Shouldn't it? Because, like, you can have a med card when you're 18.
Right. Exactly.
You can have a medical card if you're 10, can't you?
Yeah, I don't think there's like an age limit on it. I think it's just a collaboration between your doctor and the parents, and yeah. And I think the most interesting part from the ACLU's testimony that I noted, there's some quotes that I'll post in an article that I will share after this episode. But the most interesting stat that the ACLU shared, and I wasn't able to find this online. I found like a few studies that I thought they were referencing, but I didn't. I wrote down the stat. I didn't write down the source that they cited, but they said only 1.5% of all traffic stops actually result in police finding any contraband, which I thought was interesting. So what that means is, like, law enforcement is just wasting their time and our money by doing this, when you consider that statistic. So here's where law enforcement starts testifying, and we're about to get to the odor-proof container question that you had, which I think is the best part of this whole story. So, like I said, representatives of law enforcement, there were a lot in uniform, kind of a interesting scenario to find myself in, provided oral testimony, arguing that this legislation seeks to overturn the most recent Illinois Supreme Court ruling, and in doing so would negatively impact law enforcement officers, police service dogs, and would put the public at risk. A retired officer who identified as an expert with 24 years of experience in canine handling testified about the capabilities of police dogs, and this is a point I want to put in the back of both of our heads. He stated he brought this fact to the Capitol. I'm so glad he did, because I didn't have to make... Well, I still made this point, but he actually provided hard numbers that were really helpful when I had to testify. He stated that canine officers possess an odor detection capacity that is 10,000 times to 100,000 times greater than that of an average human. So their sense of smell is 10,000 to 100,000 times, stronger than ours. They also argued that Senate Bill 42 would create what they called a friction point for officers. And they testified that fentanyl being laced into marijuana is something that we should be concerned about with regard to this topic. They argued that removing the odor-proof container would significantly hinder their ability to protect Illinois residents from dangerous substances.
Why are they bringing up fentanyl-laced weed? That's not even a real thing.
Yeah, they brought it up. They cited an article from the Washington Examiner. I did write down that source. So the headline is fentanyl-laced marijuana, horse tranquilizer, and nitazines listed as top emerging threats in the U.S. The zombie drug xylazine is what they cited as a concern. So,
but really, no one is lacing the weed with fentanyl.
No, and
it's
actually,
like cross-contamination,
right?
Like in testing, a lot of the time, isn't that what they've realized?
Yeah, I would say so. It's, the fact that, nobody would be purposefully doing that. And Peter Contos,
it wouldn't get you high. It wouldn't do anything.
It also is just not business smart. Like, if you're trying to, like, keep clientele, you get what I'm saying?
Well, yeah, but it's also like it's like putting cocaine on weed. It just burns it. It doesn't do anything.
Yeah. Somebody commented and said the fentanyl-laced boogeyman strikes again. Yeah. This was my favorite part about one of my favorite parts about their testimony. They described this transition, if it were to be signed into law, as a financial burden on agencies and handlers, as they would be responsible for either retiring or replacing hundreds of cannabis-trained canines. This is the part that just, like, I was like, wow, I have to write that down. On top of that, they explained handlers would face an additional burden of personally caring for their retired partners, including medical expenses, food, and other related costs. You got to take care of the dogs, Phil, and that's hard.
Okay.
Yeah. And especially a depressed dog, because the dog's going to be depressed because it no longer has a job. You know? They didn't actually make that. They didn't say that. That was just me trying to be funny. They said this a few times throughout the hearing, that cartels and criminals would be the only ones to benefit from the passage of SB 42, arguing that it would allow them to evade detection during traffic stops. They argued that, and this kind of gets back to the fentanyl point we were just talking about, when a canine conducts a free air sniff around a vehicle, it can't distinguish between different narcotics. They claimed that cannabis is used as a cover odor by traffickers that are smuggling firearms, dangerous drugs, and potentially human trafficking.
Wait, do guns have an odor I'm unaware of?
Right. I mean, gun.
Also, I'm pretty sure fentanyl doesn't have an odor.
Yeah, I just thought it was funny that think about if you're smuggling firearms, dangerous drugs, or human trafficking. Are you really gonna make your car smell like weed?
Yeah, make my car smell like weed to hide all the illegal humans I'm smuggling.
Right. Yeah. So again, they argued that if Illinois stopped training police dogs to detect the odor of cannabis, officers would miss opportunities to catch more dangerous drugs like fentanyl, heroin, cocaine, and methamphetamine. They also, and this fell flat, we've already kind of made this point, but just wanted to say, they also attempted to draw a comparison between the odor-proof container requirement for cannabis and existing laws for firearms and alcohol. Again, we kind of already addressed this, but they asserted that these substances, or firearms, must be reasonably inaccessible, unloaded, or enclosed in a sealed case. And again, this point fell short for me because Illinois law already requires that cannabis be stored in a sealed or resealable container and reasonably accessible while a vehicle is moving. So,
but also putting it on the same level as those two things. Like, I'm not going to get in road rage and kill someone with the weed in my car. I'm not gonna, there's no certainty about the impairment of cannabis and driving, especially if you're like a regular user or a medical user. So just equating those with those, it makes no sense.
Yeah, our viewers are laughing right now. They're saying dumb arguments. Reminder, we are live right now, so if you want to comment below, we can display your comment. Make sure to smash that like button if you haven't already and subscribe. It's time to talk about that cannabis container that came in, Phil. So Jim Kychek, a name that might sound familiar to you. I don't know if that name sounds familiar, but it was familiar for me because he's testified a few different times, and actually we've got a video of some things he's said in the past which kind of contradict some things that he said the other day. So he's a representative of the Illinois Sheriff's Association. He actually, Phil, if you recall, last session when Senator Lightford was going to include this language in her bill, he was the one that came up and said, hey, I've got concerns about this. We would support your bill as long as that removal of the odor-proof container is not in there. And Senator Lightford said, oh, I'm sorry, that was a mistake. We'll take that out. You got it, officer. So that he pops up every once in a while, especially on this topic. So he made a really brief statement during the meeting. And I can't remember if he walked up with it. For some reason, my memory is that he pulled this container out of his jacket. And he said that he purchased this from a dispensary. He referenced previous discussions where it was argued that no container is truly odor-proof. And to challenge this claim, he offered to pass around the product, asserting that since no one in the room could detect its smell, the container must be odor-proof.
I hate him.
Yeah, and let's look at this container that he passed around because
they're going to use a dog to do it.
exactly, and that's what I ended up breaking decorum on to tease that a little bit. They kept saying nobody in here can smell it. Nobody in here can smell it, and I just said
Also,
I just said canines out loud.
It's alarming to me. You haven't talked about this yet, but I know before we talked about how it says gummies on top.
Yep.
It's alarming to me that a representative from the Sheriff's Association would show up and lie to the Illinois Congress.
Yeah. And
Isn't that a little like he didn't buy that at a dispensary? It's clearly not. So why are you lying? You could have gone and gotten something from a dispensary. What's the issue?
Right.
Like it says gummies on top. What's
that? Yeah. Yeah. So, and this is something we didn't notice this until after the fact. I wish I would have, and I did ask them to pass this container to me because just as easily as they can say they can't smell it, I can say I can smell it. Prove that I can't.
Well, right. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And that's the point. That is actually the point. I don't mean to be like a smart ass. I'm just saying like a cop can say that he can smell it just as easily as he can say he can't smell it. And it's like yeah, it goes both ways. So what we did notice during the hearing is, and you can see this, we're displaying it on screen right now, the container lacked any branding. I didn't notice this until after the fact when Capital News Illinois posted the footage, but as you said, Phil, it appears to be mislabeled. I don't know if somebody picked off this label or what, but this label indicates that the container contains edible cannabis. It says ingrown farms, red raspberry gummies, 100 milligrams. Flower's not dosed like that.
You should we should send this to IGF.
Yeah.
Be like, did you know that the Sheriff's Association is presenting this as a product you made to the Illinois Congress?
Yeah. And so to your point, Phil, how Kychek obtained this product remains unclear to me, but I can think of a few possible explanations. One, a cultivation center may have mislabeled the product, resulting in a dispensary overlooking that and unknowingly selling it under the wrong classification, which admittedly seems very unlikely. I don't know if you recall, but
there's no way that would happen.
Exactly. I mean, look, I have talked to several people in the industry, and it's something, I think this is how we both learned about destruction of product. If a product comes in mislabeled, they have to destroy it. They can't even like send it back and get it labeled properly. They have to destroy it.
I also just like, I have seen bad weed from Illinois producers. This looks like really weird.
Yeah. Well, and this is a point that Senator Ventura ended up making later.
Is that even weed? Is it just...
Well, it may be weed, but how old is it? You know, old weed, old dried out weed. You sit here and say, well, it's in this container. It doesn't smell. How old is that?
That's what I'm wondering. Yeah. It's like, did they just find some like really, really old stuff they had laying around in an evidence room? And
yeah, it's insane. It's insane.
Also, how... Not only is it alarming to me that a representative of the Sheriff's Association would show up and lie, it's alarming to me that he apparently is dumb.
What do you mean?
Like, it says gummies on top.
Right.
Like, it's just such an obvious fake thing.
And I mean, look, our representatives looked at this too. Like they had it in their hand and they're like, I can't smell it. What, you know? Yeah. Somebody said it's a strain. I don't think red, first of all, I hope you're joking, Miggy. Red raspberry gummies. I actually thought that. I was like, well, maybe it's a strain.
No, because it says 100 milligrams.
That's what I was about to say. 100 milligrams. Also, I've had people in the industry. This adds another layer to this. Yeah, he was joking. He said, you never heard of the gummy strain? Somebody else said, I love Phil. Somebody pointed out to me in the industry, I actually didn't notice this, so I can't take credit for it. This apparently is not even a label that would be in retail. So that like further confuses me.
Well, right, because it has way more information.
Correct. You already know. Yep. Exactly. This is like what I think somebody told me an inventory.
By this.
Right? Where did they get this?
I want to get to the bottom of this.
Yeah, like how did you get this? I wonder if you can like FOIA like what the law enforcement, like did they spend our tax dollars to quote unquote acquire this product? Like I have so many questions. So many questions.
Also, like, would like any of the representatives that were there care that this is not a real thing?
Again, this is like one of my biggest regrets. I did ask them to pass that container my way. They wouldn't. I don't want to say they wouldn't, but they didn't. I think I would have noticed this in the hearing. I was surprisingly calm. I thought I hadn't planned to go.
Oh, that it said gummies on top.
Yeah, it's something I would have
it wasn't
noticed.
close enough for you to see it at the time. Yeah.
No, yeah, it wasn't. So he basically brought it up and then brought it over to the senators. And this senator that I ended up getting into a back and forth with was like, nobody can smell it. I've got it right here. I can't smell it, you know? So yeah.
You know what the funny thing about all this is? I just realized there is actually smell-proof containers. Mason jars are pretty great. But still with dogs, I guess that wouldn't work.
That's my thing, man. It's like, you know, we can say that and you're right. And you know, even I've got a container over here. It's not over here, of course. It's somewhere in my office. But, you know, there are containers that the state of Illinois has, I believe HHS from Illinois and some other agency. They've created these containers that are supposedly odor-proof. But again, it's like odor-proof to who? And they law enforcement are the ones that made it clear that they plan to start training dogs again, not only in their annual cannabis report, which we've covered on the show in the past, but in this hearing, they're saying, you know, they brought up that canines have a better sense of smell. And it's like, I don't know, if I were them, I would not have brought up that point at all. You know, like, because it gave me ammunition to be like, we're not talking about whether we in this room can smell it. You just made the point that dogs have a crazy sense of smell. So why not bring a fucking dog in?
Did they stop? They never stopped training the dogs on the smell.
They did according to the annual cannabis report, between I think 2020 and 2023. And then in the annual cannabis report, they made clear that based on anticipated court rulings, they may start to train cannabis canines again.
But I feel like that doesn't even make sense because they wanted to keep that odor-proof language in the law. So I don't believe them if they ever stop training these dogs on weed.
Right. Yeah. So this is an interesting part that I'm about to cover. So Jim Kychek at the hearing said, through our training and experience, we can make the distinction between raw and burnt cannabis. But in the past, let's watch a video of something else Mr. Kychek has said.
Over 2 grams.
You may very well run into a situation where not only does the owner of the vehicle or the driver of the vehicle have raw cannabis, but they also have burnt. So how are we supposed to make a distinction there?
And he's not the only one, by the way. Sangamon County Sheriff Jack Campbell said, oftentimes the smell of burnt or unburnt or raw cannabis is difficult to tell the difference in. These are from law enforcement officers, these quotes. So if new training methods have been developed to address this issue, he didn't mention them during his testimony. You know, so he said, just
it
to
really
try to
does, like, I mean, if you're outside walking and a big waft of someone's weed smoke hits you, I don't know that it really does smell any different than like putting your face like off the top of my head. It's just like, oh, that smells like weed.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I never think like the only reason I think, oh, someone's smoking weed somewhere nearby is because it's wafting. Like I don't see anyone, so it's obviously wafting on the wind.
Right.
You know, it would have to be like a farm otherwise.
Right.
But Yeah, like I mean, as someone who's used cannabis like my whole life, I can't really think of a super noticeable difference between the two smells.
Yeah. And some people have commented they can tell the difference in the past, but I personally, like you just said, I like to make this joke. I've been studying this plant for over 10 years and you could still fool me. Like if you put a bandana on my eyes and walked me into a room and it's like, is what you're smelling burnt or raw cannabis? I think you could fool me. Also, I made this point in my testimony, which I'll read later. It's 2025. You can vape cannabis now. How does that play into this? What does that smell like? You know?
It wouldn't smell burnt, right?
Right. It kind of smells like popcorn, in my opinion. But again, to try and be fair here, he said that through our training and experience, we can make this distinction. So let's set aside the fact that he said what I felt was the exact opposite in the past in that report that we just said, where he said, how are we supposed to tell the difference? Maybe because cannabis is legal now, they have been trained and they have gotten some experience to know what the difference is. I don't know. I'm just trying to give benefit of the doubt. Again, though, I've been studying this plant for over 10
They're
years.
definitely not training them on the smell of burnt and unburnt cannabis. They literally just, when this ruling came out, they were just like, if you smell weed, just say it's unburnt.
Yeah. Somebody said, gonna fuck around and turn police into sommeliers. Well, and so back to your point, not to dwell on this too long, because we got Peter Contos' testimony up next. He made a lot of really good points. You made the point. Different strains smell different. Some strains are like really pungent. And some strains, when you burn them,
I'm gonna breed a strain of weed that smells like smoked cannabis.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like
it will be immune from search.
Mm-hmm. And one last joke just on this subject to a layman.
Also, in that same thing, there is like an odorless cannabis strain that people have developed.
I remember reading about that. Yeah,
it's like a thing I definitely know is because they want to use it. Like if you're like extracting for like medical stuff and people really don't want the taste or smell of weed, like that's what they're thinking they can really use it for.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, technically someone could be smoking that and it won't smell like anything.
Yeah, exactly. Oh yeah, Miggy says hit the like button. Yeah, please folks, hit the like button. It helps. It really helps the show. One of the best ways to support the show is to smash that like button, as the kids say. Yeah, I'll just, one last little joke here on the topic of like not being able to tell the difference. Like, I have been in situations with people that don't approve of cannabis and they've like come into a room, aka my parents when I was growing up. They'd come into my room and they'd be like, Cole, what the fuck? Have you been smoking weed in here? And it's really hard to explain, no, I wasn't smoking weed. I was just rolling it up. To them, it doesn't make a fucking difference. They don't want me to be smoking weed at all, right? But I'm like, no, I'm not that disrespectful to have smoked it in your house. I was just preparing it in your house. But again, to a layman, they can't tell the difference. It just smells like weed and it smells pungent, right? So yeah. Again, it's super interesting to hear them say they can tell the difference between burnt or unburnt when like we can't, and we smoke it quite often. And they've also said in the past, I just quoted off not only the law enforcement officer himself, I played that clip from Jim Kychek, but I also shared that quote from Sangamon County Sheriff Jack Campbell saying that unburnt or raw cannabis is difficult to tell the difference in. That's from them. That's their words, not ours. So yeah, Peter Contos from the Cannabis Equity Coalition of Illinois testified in support of SB 42 during the hearing. He noted that, and this is back to a point you made earlier, Phil, he noted that Illinois is an outlier in requiring an odor-proof container. Right?
Yeah, so they are the only state.
Yeah, from what I understand and based on his testimony.
Well, then it's truly fucking insane.
Yeah. I'll have to do more research, and please, people, if you're listening from another state or if you know Please let us know if we're wrong on that. But I'm pretty sure Illinois is, and according to Peter Contos's testimony,
I mean, I'm sure he would have. I'm sure he would have done the research.
Yeah, I agree. He also highlighted the inconsistency in cannabis packaging across the state. Phil, you mentioned earlier, like are the bags child resistant?
Well, I mean, there's that one brand. I know it's not a straight up Ziploc bag. There's a little more of a child resistant feature to it. But that brand Corner Boys sells their stuff in literally like plastic Ziploc bags. There is no way that is odor-proof.
Yeah. And that's the point I was working up to, where it's like, maybe some containers are better at containing odor. But, and I'll make this point later, one of the senators did ask, if you brought a canine in here, would they be able to detect that cannabis? Because we can't smell it, but could your canine? We'll get back to that because it was a very interesting interaction. So again, he highlighted the inconsistency in cannabis packaging across the state. There's a lot of different ones. Phil, you just made a really good point. There's one, the Corner Boys, they have it in what looks like literally a Ziploc baggie, So... and when you break a seal on a container, so the law allows it to be sealed or resealable, maybe it is better at keeping odor in when you originally buy it, but then when you seal it back up, like, is that seal, you get what I'm saying? Like, how does that affect its ability to retain odor? So yeah, he really emphasized that packaging standards are not uniform and argued that the single example being passed around the room was not representative of all cannabis products available in Illinois. He also directly addressed the claim that cannabis is being laced with fentanyl, inviting officials to provide any data supporting this assertion. He ridiculed the talking point, arguing it makes little sense from a business perspective, questioning why anyone would intentionally kill off their own clientele. So,
well, also like if the fentanyl someone was theoretically putting in weed did actually like get you affected after, like if you were just looking for weed afterwards, wouldn't you be like, what the fuck was that?
True.
You're not gonna be like, oh, that was the best weed I ever had.
Right. Yeah, exactly. You start nodding off after you smoke a bowl.
Yeah, like, whoa. You'd be like, what the fuck was that?
Well, I also took the time to provide testimony. I almost missed my opportunity. They were really trying to blow through it, but Senator Ventura helped to make sure that Peter and I were both recognized as people that wanted to give testimony. And I wrote down my testimony. I had to prepare my remarks because you know me, Phil. Go all over the place, lose my train of thought sometimes. So I wanted to make sure that I had my thoughts prepared. And it's like up to getting up there, I was adjusting it because they were just saying crazy shit. It's like, well, I got to address that too. Got to address that. So I said, my name is Cole Preston. I'm not with an organization. I'm representing myself. The Illinois State Police recently made clear in the annual cannabis report, available on the Illinois Cannabis Regulation Oversight's office, that they plan to resume training canines to detect the scent of cannabis. I believe some of our friends in law enforcement mentioned that today. As law enforcement mentioned, dogs have an exceptionally strong sense of smell, which raises serious concerns. Compounding this issue is the fact that cannabis is not packaged in odor-proof containers. I said, I would love to smell that container. I would also just ask that all of you visit a dispensary. I wish I would have, instead of saying that, I wish I would have said, by a show of hands, who of you have been to a dispensary? Because that's an easy one that, raise your hand and then I can continue my testimony. It doesn't really require back and forth. Woulda, coulda, shoulda, but yeah.
I'm sure not many of them.
Right.
If anything, it was for like a opening or something.
Exactly. Yeah. So again, I said I would ask all of you visit a dispensary, and I said the reason it smells like cannabis is because the packages are not odor-proof. The products arrive pre-packaged, so the reason that you can smell cannabis in a dispensary is because the packaging is not odor-proof, which means that as soon as someone purchases cannabis and enters their vehicle, they're technically out of compliance with the law due to the permeating nature of cannabis. Additionally, there are entirely innocent reasons a person might smell like raw cannabis. Medical cannabis patients in the state of Illinois are legally allowed to grow their own plants, and those who tend to them naturally will carry the scent. I'm pretty sure, for as long as I was growing and as pungent as it was in my house, I'm pretty sure my whole wardrobe reeked of raw cannabis. Similarly, I didn't say that, by the way, that was a little bit of a tangent there, off the cuff on this show. I'll continue with my testimony. I said, similarly, employees at cultivation centers will leave work smelling like raw cannabis despite handling it in a fully legal setting. Given these realities, relying on canine alerts or odor as probable cause for searches creates unnecessary legal risks for consumers, patients, and industry workers alike. It also places an unnecessary burden on law enforcement to differentiate between the smell of burnt or unburnt cannabis. I'd also like to remind the room that we currently live in the year 2025 and you can vaporize cannabis, so I'm curious where that falls into the burnt and raw paradigm. If cannabis is legal, the mere odor of the plant should not be grounds for searching or detaining someone. While the smell of cannabis could be one factor in an investigation, it should not, on its own, justify law enforcement action, especially given the many legal reasons a person or vehicle may carry the scent. Thank you. So that's all I had to say. Thanks, Phil. Thank you so much. So yeah, it felt a little weird. Somebody just commented, "Yeah, I literally always smell like cannabis." I'm pretty sure this is Mason. He has a cannabis farm. So
I like to think I don't, but I probably do.
Yeah, Kush is your cologne. Yeah. So here's where I broke decorum. A little bit embarrassed about this, but
You just stood up and shouted, "You lie!"
You lie! Now, I actually am very proud of how I handled it, despite the fact that I did technically break decorum. I was in the pocket, Anyways, Senator Steve McClure, a Republican, spoke next and began by directly refuting my statement and challenging me to smell the container myself, a challenge I now regret not accepting. I was sitting down at the time. I didn't want to be like, I'm going to get up and let me see it. I didn't know if security was going to get, it's kind of weird. He insisted that he couldn't detect any odor and invited everyone in the room to do the same, repeatedly emphasizing that the container was completely scent-free. It was at that point that I said, "Canines." He said, "What?" I said, "Canines." And he said, "We're not talking about whether or not canines can smell it." And I said, "Yeah, but they are," pointing at law enforcement. That's all I said. The chair of the Senate Law Committee was like, "Hey, sir, could you?" And I was like, "Yep, my bad." But it was at that point I had said what needed to be said.
What an idiot. It's one jar that the police brought in that says gummies on top, and you're basing your opinion on whether or not you go to a dispensary. They smell.
Exactly.
And you're legally not allowed to have open product in the stores in Illinois.
Right. You can have sample jars, but nobody does. Very rarely do people actually carry sample jars because you can only carry them for about a week and then you have to destroy the product. So nobody does that, So, Phil, buckle up. Senator McClure also told stories about kids that had purchased marijuana laced with rat poison and another that had overdosed with after smoking cannabis with fentanyl. His remarks were met with audible groans in the room. I wrote that down. I actually did appreciate this question. He also asked if anyone in the room could confirm whether dispensaries were complying with the mandate that cannabis be sold in an odor-proof container. And I considered approaching, again, to briefly reiterate my testimony, but the way he framed the question made it seem as though he was specifically asking for input from someone who owned a dispensary or worked in the industry, and nobody in the room did. Peter Contos and I believe, maybe somebody else was in there being quiet, but I didn't see anybody else that I recognized from the industry in the room. Given that I fit neither category.
Isn't it funny how, not involved and not giving a shit the cannabis industry is with further decriminalization? If anyone was going to be there, wouldn't you think it'd be them?
And look, that's a conversation I had with some people after the fact. I mean, I literally
it's just weird. Like you would think, I don't know, like that's so strange.
And they were there, by the way, because it's a conversation I had. I said, why were we the only two people like there? I mean, Senator Ventura can stand up for herself with regard to this language, but like nobody from the cannabis industry was there. And guess what? I saw their lobbyists after the fact. They were in Springfield, they just weren't there, which is frustrating because you'd think they would want to stand up for their own customers. Now, I will be clear that if you look on the witness slips, there were proponents. Like I saw Ambrose Jackson was a proponent. He wasn't there, but he signed in support. I saw a few others that signed in support of the bill.
No, but I mean like the big players.
Yes, I get what you meant. I get
like Ambrose is like involved in activism and stuff. Like that doesn't surprise me that he would do a slip, but like, like just these giant companies.
Right. Yeah, and I get, that's really the point. I want to be clear. I was not saying like Ambrose should have been there or anything. That's not what I was saying. I was trying to build up to like what you just said, where it's like
I know that these people are like, I know that they're busy. I'm sure people want to rag on like CEOs, but I'm sure it's not like the easiest job. But like if someone like Charlie Bechtel could have shown up and given testimony and support, like you would think that would like be kind of meaningful.
Right. Right.
It would be like a counterpoint to a bunch of cops being there.
Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah. And that's kind of the thought I had as well. It would have been helpful. But if, again, so he was asking if anybody could confirm whether dispensaries were complying with the mandate. And given that I'm not in the industry, and also considering my back and forth that I just had with the senator, I thought maybe it wasn't a good idea to get up and approach the stand again. I wasn't like upset. I was, again, very calm. I did break decorum, and in retrospect, that's a little embarrassing. But again, happy with what I said. I don't really regret it. Just wish I would have maybe handled it a different way. So here's where Senator Ventura made me really proud that she's representing this issue. She responded by first saying she didn't know many details regarding the product that was being presented, including its age. She also explained that cannabis products come in a variety of packaging types, and reiterated something that Peter said earlier. Using a single example to represent all products was misleading. She also pointed out that what humans can smell from a container is vastly different than what a trained canine can smell. So, kudos to Senator Ventura for responding with some really sound logic.
Well, I mean, it's nice to like occasionally see people in the legislature that seem to get it.
Right? Yeah. To your point, here's another one. Senator Robert Martwick was the next to ask questions. I didn't take a lot of notes on everything that he said. A lot of his questions were about how the totality of circumstances would apply to this bill, which is an idea that was debated in the Illinois Supreme Court hearings. He questioned whether the current law distinguishes between cannabis odor detected by canines versus humans, and it doesn't. He also questioned whether it was possible that if even though people in the room couldn't smell it, if a trained dog might be able to detect it. And this was such an interesting response by law enforcement. I'll try to do my best to give you the analogy that he gave. He responded by stating that odors can eventually seep out of any container, but he didn't really provide a direct answer regarding the specific cannabis container in question. The analogy that he used, he was like, well, let me kind of explain this using an analogy. And he said, if you have a candle, I've got a candle right here, and you put the lid on it and it smothers the fire out, the container fills up with smoke. And eventually that smoke will seep out of the container. So it was like a long way of, again, he didn't really say yes or no to the question, but he kind of did reveal that any container will have smell that seeps out of it. You know what I'm saying?
What a weird example.
Right?
It doesn't answer the question.
It doesn't, but it also like it kind of does, but I feel like it was so long, such a long analogy that it just like people got lost in it. You know what I'm saying? But for me, I felt like I knew what he was trying to say, which is that eventually any odor will seep out of a container, which just questioned me like, what the hell are they doing here? You know, if that's the case. But they also noted, and Phil, I love this one. I said it already, but I had to write this down. They said the Illinois General Assembly and law enforcement had collaborated to create what they consider one of the best cannabis laws in the country, emphasizing that the, quote, odor-proof container was part of the deal, end quote. It's part of the deal, bucko. And that lines up with something Evan Bruno has said on the show in the past. You know, he said that they basically fought hard for this because we haven't really said this yet, and we're getting to the end of what I have written for the hearing, but there is a profit incentive, a profit motive rather, for police to get access to your vehicles. They can literally seize your vehicle. And then they can turn around and auction the vehicle and any other things you have inside of it. So if you got computers with you, anything else, they can turn around and auction it. And in fact, I don't know if you remember, Phil, but you remember we referenced that person that might have been a victim of retribution from law enforcement. He was growing in his house. When he was leaving the courtroom, I don't know if I ever said this on the podcast. I'm pretty sure I said it to you privately. When he was leaving the courtroom, he saw this digital screen, and on it he saw Mars Hydro grow lights, a rosin press, and other equipment that had just been seized from his house. They were auctioning it off. They were auctioning off the equipment that he used to grow cannabis. It's just crazy. So this is I thought one of the most notable exchanges during Senator Sims' question. I believe his name's LG Sims. He asked Senator Ventura a few different questions, but one of the questions that I found most notable that he asked is if she intended to continue working with law enforcement to reach a compromise on this issue. She responded by saying that these conversations have been ongoing for years and stated, "We are at an impasse." I believe she said, "No, we are at an impasse," but I definitely wrote down the quote,
Because
"We are at an impasse."
there is some compromise.
Right.
You either have it or you don't.
Yeah. And I thought that was...
It just seems like we shouldn't, since we're the only state that does.
Right. I thought that was especially notable because Senator Ventura and law enforcement, like they were pretty like amicable, for lack of better words. Like they were talking to each other. They didn't seem like before the hearing, like they didn't seem like they were like mad at each other. Like they seemed pretty respectful of each other and everything. But then for him to ask that, and she was basically just like, "No, there's no way I can compromise on this." And I was like, good for you. You know, standing up. So.
Well, it's like the compromise was what resulted in the situation we have now.
Exactly.
So,
true.
And that was in the context of like, you know, it's like 5 years ago. It's 5-6 years ago now. Like there's like hemp is a thing now.
That's actually the next,
like,
that was like pretty much one of the last moments that I had noted that I thought was super, super interesting. There were more questions by Senator Jill Tracy, and follow-up questions by Senator McClure, who was that guy saying kind of some wild stuff. I didn't find much of their commentary or questioning to be particularly notable, so I won't include it in my article, but I will just say off the top of my head, I remember Senator Tracy saying, "Well, at the end of last session, I remember driving and I could smell cannabis in the air. So obviously people don't understand that you can't use it in a car." And she even asked, this was a funny exchange that I just remembered. She asked Senator Ventura, have you ever smelled cannabis while you've been driving? She's like, "Do I smell the inside of other people's cars while I'm driving? No, I usually have my windows up." I thought it was kind of funny.
I will say, like, you do, like, driving around the part of Chicago I'm in, I smell people smoking in their cars all the time.
I agree. You smell it in Champaign, which is a city I've gone to, closest thing to Chicago that I've spent a lot of time in.
Like, I don't know
Also,
exactly how it works with both of the windows and the cars shut, but like, it still it happens.
yeah. Depending on where she was, she said she was leaving the Capitol. Depending on where she was, it's very possible she passed by me. I wasn't smoking in my car, but I was on the side. All of us, the hemp ban was dead. The hemp ban was dead, so we're smoking hemp out on the steps of the Capitol. So yeah, cannabis was probably in the air that day. Speaking of hemp, and this is the last big note that I have on this hearing, Senator Martwick asked questions again and said, he asked if if dogs can tell the difference between hemp and marijuana. The officer seemed to suggest that canines can distinguish between hemp and marijuana, though I'm not sure if that claim is accurate. He did reference some research to support his statement, but I don't recall what he cited. And after the hearing, I approached him and asked for his business card to continue the conversation, but he politely declined my request to connect. My thing is, like, I don't think a dog can smell like, yeah, there is cannabis in the car that has over 0.3% Delta 9.
Yeah.
Like, because police have even admitted they don't have equipment to quantify the levels of Delta 9, let alone if a dog can.
Well, and even if it was like 100% CBD flower, like, it's still the cannabis plant.
Right.
It's all the same.
It's all the same. It all smells a lot. It smells the same. Yeah. So yeah, that was a 2-hour long hearing. I definitely didn't know everything, but I do feel like I've definitely shared a lot more details that have been shared in the media so far. And I will reiterate the vote. The senators voted 7-3 to pass this bill out of committee. All 7 votes were Democrats. All 3 votes were Republicans. The Party of Freedom, the Republicans. So yeah, it was a super interesting hearing, and I wish that the whole thing would have been captured. That's actually why I ended up going. I use this service sometimes to watch, like, either streaming it on the Illinois website, or there are a few other services that stream these hearings, and none of them had this hearing on their agenda. And I'm glad I went, because the only person that was there was Capital News, Illinois. So, a lot of details may not have made it out of that hearing if I hadn't gone
Like
and
all this
done my due diligence.
bullshit about these gummies.
Yeah. Yeah. So, man, I wish you could have been there, Phil. I think you would have had a good time. It's definitely.
I probably would have gotten kicked out.
You think you wouldn't have been able to hold back?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah. It'll be interesting to see how this moves forward. I will just reiterate once again that I'm super proud of the cannabis community. Again, at the beginning of the hearing, there were 338 slips filed in support of the bill, only 98 in opposition. After the fact, what's funny, Phil? I don't know if law enforcement was like, shit, they really blew us out of the water. Because if you look at the witness slips today, again, that's what it was at the beginning of the hearing. Now they've managed to pull together 297 opponents. Too little, too late. That wasn't there at the beginning of the hearing. But I guess what I wanted to say is not only applaud the cannabis community for coming together, participating in the process, but I want to tell you, stand by, because this has to go through the House again. From what I understand, it will have to go through a committee in the House again, which means that we will need to file witness slips one more time. I might have to make another trip one more time. I might even have to bring some of my own containers for show and tell. You know what I'm saying?
Bring the ones the state provided and show that they're not compliant.
Yeah, it would be interesting to bring a printout of what the state brought in and just be like, hey, where did you get that? Kind of bring that back up. But I don't know if that's too little too late either. But yeah. Yep, super interesting stuff. Somebody's pointing out they're making a big deal on Twitter. They're selling weed in Ace Hardware. Yeah, I won't get into that too much. We can discuss it briefly because we're about to wrap. But yeah, I'm definitely getting roasted on Twitter right now because somebody posted that photo of Ace Hardware, and the anti-hempers are like, oh, kids are gonna get it and stuff. And so I just took the time to post how we display alcohol. Oftentimes, I'll show you what I'm talking about. Maybe I'll show you. I gotta pull it up here. While I pull this up, Phil, any other thoughts on just the madness that occurred?
I just hope it passes.
Yeah, me too. All right, here are the pictures. So, somebody posted the picture of cannabis being sold in Ace Hardware, and they were like, it's right next to the candy. What's going on? Well, here's a picture from one of my local grocery stores where you have little shooters of alcohol right next to the Sour Patch Kids and the candy. You also have right next to the chips and drinks, here's these little shooters of alcohol. This is in a gas station. I mean, it's right next to the candy. I guess that sign right there that says it's only available to 21 years of age or older, that maybe that's what we need to do with it, because that protects the kids, right? Just that little sign.
It is pretty crazy how socially acceptable alcohol is.
Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah, it's like people don't really think about it just because it's the culture, but like if you stand back and look at how people treat weed and the hysteria you get in with these hemp products being available certain like at random places, gas stations and stuff, and like nobody cares that you can just buy liquor at a gas station.
Yeah, and I also like
alcohol. Like alcohol is a hard drug.
Right.
People think drugs and alcohol, like it should be weed and drugs.
Yeah.
But like alcohol is a hard drug. Like, I mean, I would class it as more dangerous than like most psychedelics. Like people do crazy shit when they drink, and just the most random place, like those tiny bottles next to like candy. That should probably not be a thing.
Yeah. And I mean, I tend to agree, but it like takes us back to the point where somebody says, or we used to say, like, we need to legalize and regulate alcohol or cannabis like alcohol and tobacco. And this is how we do it. So it's like, let's do that. Like you say, maybe not right next to the candy, but I mean, if alcohol can do it, why not cannabis? And it's funny, one of the responses I got, they said, I see your pics of alcohol in the same manner, just what you said. I see your pics of alcohol in the same manner as the cannabis products I'm bitching about. In other words, like they shouldn't be next to the candy. But they also said, and it's not in this response, they said, we can't have poison being sold right next to candy. And it's like, alcohol is, I would call poison. I mean, like cannabis is much further than that.
Where's the rat poison in that hardware store? Is that in close proximity to the candy too?
Right. That's a good question. Like I say, just a funny parting thought. Thank you for dropping that comment. I don't know. I think it's cool if cannabis is sold places anywhere, as long as it's age gated,
I mean, I would like it to be sold just like, I would just like to be able to buy direct from my farm online.
Right.
Because like, I hate going to dispensaries. They suck.
Mm-hmm.
There's like so much like friction in that transaction always. It's like, why am I here for a half hour?
Yeah. And that's why I even responded to that, because it's like, I feel like when people say that cannabis can't be sold in just a regular store or online like that, what they're saying is like, no, we must treat cannabis like a controlled substance. Like you do have to go to like a pharmacy or something like that.
Well, because the thing too, it's like, I get being like, oh, it shouldn't be at Ace Hardware. Like I can understand that because Ace Hardware, unless I don't realize this, I don't think Ace Hardware sells alcohol or cigarettes.
That's a good point.
But
think they do.
But like a gas station definitely sells alcohol and cigarettes, at least the ones that are licensed to do so. So I mean, anywhere where you have like a protocol for checking ID to buy products, you should probably be able to buy cannabis.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I know you've said this in the past, but it's like, where did this, when did people start like hating gas stations? You know, like,
yeah, I do just love that. Like, it's like gas station weed. It's like, well, we all go to the gas station.
Yeah, we all have to go to the gas
Sometimes
station.
if it's like a Buc-ee's, they're actually like a destination and they're fun.
Mm-hmm. And to your point, like I remember when Colorado and Washington first legalized, I called one of my friends in Washington and I was like, so like when you go to the gas station, is there weed there? Like, cause like that's just what I thought.
Yeah, that is a funny thought. Yeah.
You know, and they were like, no, because at the time Washington legalized it, but they didn't have sales ready yet. But still, it's funny to think that like that's what I thought, because the whole campaign had always been, let's legalize cannabis and regulate it like alcohol and tobacco. And it's like, okay, so then it's going to be in gas stations,
So yeah,
right?
you would have thought like, yeah, like if you're any kind of retailer, you could just apply for the little license to be able to carry it.
Yeah.
Like anyone could do that.
Yeah, I just figured it would just have to be behind the counter, like cigarettes, you know, but.
Yeah.
So, all right, man. Well, Phil, I appreciate you chopping it up, and we didn't even mention it, but the daylight is getting longer, the days are getting warmer, so cheers to that, right?
Cheers to that. Coming spring.
Hell yeah. I am really looking forward to the time shift. I hate losing an hour, but I love that, additional sunlight that comes with it. And just really looking forward to summer at this point. I'm tired of the Chillinois winter. So, well, Phil, looks like we got one last comment in. Oh, yeah. It's time for cannabis legalization news. Just about that time. Well, Phil, I hope you enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Thanks again for joining me. I always appreciate it when you come on. So I'm
going to go watch CLN now.
Hell yeah, me too. We'll see you over at CLN, everybody. Take care. Bye.
Beginning January 1st, 2020, the recreational use of cannabis will be legal in the state of Illinois.
Available to stream now, my mini doc dives into the history of Illinois legalization, starting with
January 1st. What should we expect? The biggest thing that we need people to understand is that January 1, in terms of the criminal justice system here in this state, is the end of prohibition.
See how Illinois missed its chance at real cannabis reform with key failures, including the fact that
the program includes regulation on possession limits.
So people can still be arrested for a possession.
And I want to highlight that in its first year of legalized recreational marijuana in the state of Illinois, they arrested 3 times as many black people for possession than any other race.
We've run into so much cannabis, we've run out of places to put it.
I've represented people and taken their cases through the court system who got charged with more serious crimes only because the police said that they smelled cannabis. And not because the police said you have illegal cannabis, or not because you have too much cannabis, or not because you're high on cannabis, but because I can smell it and that's it.
Attorney goes, he understands that he can't be smoking and his cannabis flower shouldn't be open. And I was like, I'd like to say for the record that I was not smoking and my flower was not open.
So that's where we're at right now in Illinois.
Yeah.
And I hope it changes.
Start watching now at colememo.com/minidoc.